Let's get started. Mary Hunt here at Water. Diane New, you saw making a cameo after her hip replacement last week, a week ago today. She's made a wonderful recovery. And my colleagues, Magdalena and Wed, who are with us from Germany for a year, we're delighted to welcome all of you to the mid-year meeting of the Feminist Liberation Theologians Network. Let's begin, as we always do at Water, with a land acknowledgement, an act that we've incorporated into our programs to remind ourselves of why we do what we do and what we do need to do more of, given the systemic injustice Indigenous and other people face in this country. A land acknowledgement is a beginning, not an end. We at Water are on the Indigenous land in Silver Spring, Maryland, that is the traditional and contemporary land of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. We acknowledge their trauma and the injustice toward Indigenous people that is deep in U.S. culture and history. We join in efforts to eradicate it and to make reparations for the genocide involved. Please consider for a moment with me the Native people on whose land you sit. Feel free to list their names in the chat as a way to honor them, if you please. Thank you. Today we meet at a very difficult time in our world's history, and I appreciate your being here because it is groups like this in which we find our own and our collective ways forward. The question for today is, what in the world is going on? What in the world is going on? No one knows everything, but as the Women of the Grail, which was a Catholic-rooted spiritual movement of some decades ago, as the Women of the Grail used to say, together, we're a genius. Together, we're a genius. So today, together, we come to get various perspectives, to talk with one another, and to plan future actions at a time of unprecedented injustice. These are hard times. There's a systemic dismantling of democracy and its institutions as we knew them in the US, with similar actions in other countries. The wars in Gaza, Israel, Ukraine, Russia, Sudan, and other places show no signs of abating. Here in the US, many people think it's just fine and dandy to cut Medicaid benefits to the neediest, to fire government officials with no earthly idea how or whether their jobs will be done. For example, we enter now the hurricane season, and the Weather Service is being cut. The courts are under siege. The Supreme Court is wobbly at best. The arts are being defunded. I mentioned earlier to my colleagues that the National Museum of Women in the Arts had a $100,000 federal grant rescinded just this week for a major exhibition on women in the arts. No comparison with children starving in Gaza, needless to say, but another way of understanding how what's happening at Harvard and Columbia means that all of us are paying a dear price for our work, whatever it may be. This network, the Feminist Liberation Theologians Network, began in 1995, can you believe it? When Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza and I gathered a group of colleagues to discuss Catholic women's issues. In 1997, we opened the doors as widely as possible, which started a tradition of getting together each year since then at the annual meeting of the American Academy of Religion and the Society of Biblical Literature. We will meet next in Boston on Friday, November the 21st, hopefully from 4 to 6 in the evening. But just as we came together this afternoon, there's some talk about having our meeting either at a different time or in a different venue to accommodate the Zoom to have this kind of meeting, since so many of our international colleagues are really voicing serious doubts about their coming to that meeting. Not to our meeting especially, but to the AAR-SBL, because of the way in which the United States government is behaving, not only toward them individually as they come through immigration, but also to their countries. Note that the talks from our 2024 session in November of last year were published in this absolutely hot off the press issue of the Journal of Feminist Studies in Religion. Susan, your piece is in here. This was the November meeting in 24, when we looked in a way at responses to the US 2024 presidential election. And we were just past the election when we met in November, but I'm just delighted to see this new volume, 41, number 1, has the collection of talks, and this means that we're being listened to. And I think that's exactly what we want to say today, is that we're listening to each other, but other people are listening to us as well. Now, on a very practical note, my dear Victoria Rue in California is heading to Croatia in June, and asked the assembled to put her in touch with any feminist theologians in Croatia. So if you have an idea of feminist colleagues in Croatia with whom you think Victoria Rue would benefit conversation, please put that in the chat. What's a network for if we don't connect? So here's the plan for today. We're going to hear from two feminist liberation theologians who have retired from full-time teaching, but are doing many creative things to resist and create new just space. Then we'll see a video with some snippets of insights from women from other parts of the world. And then we'll talk with each other in small groups about what's happening where we are, especially as it pertains to higher education, the surveillance state, which is Victoria Rue's wise understanding of what's going on, and the general disruption of the social fabric with devastating implications for those who are young, poor, trans, and people of color. And finally, we'll conclude with our insights on the table as a plenary as we decide what we're going to do next. We normally close at the top of the hour. I have taken the privilege of extending us until 2:15 today, maximum. If necessary, the Zoom will remain open after that, but we'll go just that 15 minutes extra because of the small group time. The session is being recorded. Feel free to opt out of the video if you sense any danger for yourself. Others like me at Water are happy to make clear our positions and to make them public. For your information, Water has signed several letters with other NGOs pledging solidarity. Of course, we run the risk of being easy targets having our names on such letters, but risk is something each person and each organization must assess and act on. These days, in my view, call for courage. Just gathering like this gives me more courage. Let me move then to my dear colleagues, Kwok Pui-Lan and Susan Thistlethwaite, who will each have 7 to 8 minutes to lay out some thoughts of their own. I will dispense with long introductions of such well-known and distinguished colleagues. However, I would be remiss not to say that both who are retired, sort of, have overlapping interests as well as distinct perspectives on various issues. They have decades of experience in feminist liberation theologies, and both, interestingly, have started Substacks that deal with difficult and crucial topics in the face of current global crisis. Professor Kwok Pui-Lan is a retired theologian from Episcopal Divinity School, and yet again retired from Candler School of Theology at Emory University, where she taught various courses on liberation issues from a distinctly Asian feminist starting point. She is now a distinguished scholar for 2025-26 at Episcopal Divinity School, participating in what she calls a variety of initiatives that support further scholarship, education, collaborative partnerships around post-colonial theology in the Anglican Communion and beyond. Her Substack, Kwok and Roll, is a must-read. She'll be followed by Professor Susan Brooks Thistlethwaite, another of the rock stars in our midst. She was president and longtime professor of theology at Chicago Theological Seminary, where she is now emerita. She continues her steady, reliable, always insightful, and direct writing in her Substack, No Fear, Religion, and Politics. Yesterday, for example, she looked at the Vietnam generation, Exhibit A, Bruce Springsteen, in light of current presidential chaos. In recent years, she's turned to fiction, writing a number of mystery novels with strong women characters and clear justice education resources woven in. You see in both cases why I called them both sort of retired. This is what it looks like when you're in feminist work in religion. You do all you can, as long as you can, the best you can. It begins to sound Methodist, doesn't it? Pui-Lan, we turn to you first with gratitude, and then to Susan.
Thank you very much, Mary, for having me. And I also want to thank Susan and all of you for participating in this wonderful dialogue, Feminist Liberation Theology Network. Let me begin by sharing with you how did I respond to the inauguration of President Donald Trump. I was flying back from a conference. So on the plane, I watched the recording of President Trump's inauguration speech. And I told myself I needed to do something. If not now, when? So by the end of February, I started a YouTube channel, a podcast, and then following Susan's step, because she is way ahead of me, I started my Substack. Why did I do that? Because I want to intervene in the public sphere. As you know, the internet is dominated by right-wing Christian media. And I thought progressive theologians like me, especially working on post-colonial theology, needs to speak and speak loudly. Not only me, I also want to invite my progressive friends who are theologians, activists, and people who are from other faiths to join me in this conversation. I want to generate some momentum to talk about how, as progressive liberation theologians, we can and must speak and do something at this time. I also want to respond if my granddaughter, when they grew up, asked me, Grandma, what did you do when President Trump mass deport people and challenge the fabrics of democracy? Because sometimes I wonder, what did the theologians or church leaders do or not do in Germany in response to Nazism? I wondered when my granddaughter happened to ask me that question, that I would have something that I would be proud of to speak. So I hope you think about your children, your grandchildren, or your younger friends, if they ask you sometime later, what did we do in our time, that we collectively, and also as this network, Feminist Liberation Theologians Network, will have something that we will be proud to say. So the topic for today is what in the world is going on? Well, I have a few minutes. That is why I am Trinitarian. I always have 3 points. 3 points. 1, the oligarchy is ruling the world. That is so clear. You recall that the tech pros, they were occupying front row seat for Trump's inauguration, for the world to see. Not only that, several of them accompanied Trump during his Middle Eastern trip, signing contracts or negotiating for future joint projects. Elon Musk, the world's richest man, occupied such an important role in the Trump administration. I know the world has always been ruled by oligarchy, but they might not be so overt and obvious in your face. But now they did not need to hide. You have the billionaires who would be members of the Trump's cabinet. So the oligarchy in the United States is ruling the country, hoping to rule the world. And I suspect oligarchies of other countries, that is, the participants, you all may think about it, whether the oligarchy in your country, they are also ruling or running the country, if not the world. So collectively, later, I will talk about resistance. How can we rise up to the occasion to resist against this oligarchy running the world? Second, I want to talk about necropolitics. Necro means death. So this is death politics. I follow the work of the Cameroon cultural and post-colonial theorist Archie Memby, who said, we are facing this necropolitics, death-dealing politics. One of the tactics of necropolitics is the confinement of specific populations in particular spaces and the militarization of the policing of borders. Memby called this caged humanity and uses Palestine as the prime example. As we know, Israel controls what can be sent to Gaza. And there is this lack of water, food, medicine, and basic necessities. Yesterday, the UN humanitarian chief warned that 14,000 babies would die within 48 hours if something is not done urgently. Now, we saw this necropolitics working not only in Gaza, Palestine, but also in different forms in Ukraine, in also some parts of Africa and Asia. It is not just exploitation. It is not just dispossession. It is death dealing, committing a certain population to such alarming situation. The survival is almost quite impossible if nothing is being done. Now, my third point. My third point is dealing with the new emergent world order as the result of Sino-US competition. Many of you know that I was born in the former British colony of Hong Kong. And as a person of Chinese descent, obviously, I have been watching the response from China. As you know that, Trump snagged 145% of tariff on goods from China. He was hoping that the Chinese president, President Xi, will call him first to negotiate. The world waited. President Xi did not call. It was the US who took the initiative to arrange for the negotiation in Geneva that brought the tariff down. Now, why this matters? That matters is because the kind of world order that we inherited from World War II has been changed drastically in the last 3 months. People are wondering whether liberal democracy and human rights still are working in the United States. If not, of course, what happens to the mass deportation and the arrest of international students and legal immigrants without due process? If United States is doing this domestically, why should the world listen to the United States when the United States preached about human rights or democracy in other parts of the world? Will China lead the new world order? Is the 21st century the Chinese century? This is a very important question. China already leads the world in terms of production of electric vehicles, solar panels, and other high-tech manufactured goods, and is competing with the United States in terms of AI and cyberspace and the control of the Arctic Circle. What would the world look like if we have this emergent Chinese empire or Sino-American empire? I usually call this Sino-American empire. One big thing, not two separate entities, Sino-American empire that is ruling the world. And finally, I just want to say a word about what feminist liberation theology would look like. I think we need to catch up with our time. That is why in my most recent Substack, I talk about what can I do without AI. We need to talk about AI and all these ramifications of new technologies. The oligarchy, they are trying to control that because that will be really the competition of our time. Not only we need to get in touch with all this AI and the impact of new technologies, we really need to form a global movement and alliance. We cannot be divided by nations, by race, by religions, or whatever that divides us, because the survival of humanity is at stake, and the survival of our planet is at stake as well. So I am so glad to participate in this conversation to generate collective wisdom to respond to the challenges that I have just described. And I am hoping to hear more from Susan.
Thank you very much, Kwak Puilan. Susan Thistlethwaite, over to you. You never fail to provide wisdom, so.
Well, thank you, Puilan. I read your Substack. I want to say religiously, but I was going to write another mystery novel. I had it laid out. Trump was elected, and I mean, they've been deteriorating for a long time, but mainstream media has just sold its soul to these corporate interests. So, but the emergence of the Substacks has democratized the connectivity that people express themselves. And, you know, Krugman from the New York Times and Telnase and all the people who've quit the mainstream media all have Substacks. And it seems to me, and it has for a very long time, that what is at the root of feminist theology, of life-giving theology, is voice. Voice. I named my textbook in liberation theology, Lift Every Voice, from honoring the African American national anthem. And it is still today stifling the voices of those who would have different perspectives, new perspectives, non-monetized perspectives, is absolutely critical. And so this proliferation of Substacks has, you know, I mean, if they're trying to build a world like this and we're going, no, I don't think so. And connectivity has for so long. I mean, I remember the first feminist consciousness raising group I participated in college. And to say out loud what I really thought was terrifying. When I first was preaching as a seminary student, my hand would, this is the truth, my hand would creep up and cover my mouth. And I had student friends that I asked to sit in the back pews who would go like this to get me to take my hand away from my own mouth. And, you know, that women keep silent in the churches, that's not just a throwaway line there in the New Testament. They want to steal our voices, to stifle our voices. And throughout the world, this has been the case for people who are oppressed. Queen uncovers this in post-colonial theology. I mean, what are they trying to do? They want the energy and they want the labor, but they don't want the voice. And so I have struggled in this Substack to encapsulate what I think is also not being said. The Substack I published once before Bruce Springsteen was the question that reporters are not asking, which is, when did you first see signs of dementia in Trump? And then I went to the National Health Services of the British, figuring they'd probably be more reliable on dementia these days. And I listed the symptoms of increasing dementia. And, you know, and you get kind of used to Trump being off the rails, but it's accelerating. It's becoming more and more acute. yes, maybe he was lying about not remembering what the Constitution said, that he took an oath to uphold, but maybe he's not lying. Maybe he actually cannot remember. And I think those are the kinds of things that these Substacks can do from the margins. But, I'm very interested to be picking up a fair number of international folks who are now subscribing to my Substack. And everyone who subscribes, I look at their bio as much as they share. And there is a global movement of people who are trying to lift their voices. Now, this is not new news. But as I was pointing out, technology is a factor in relationship to what gets magnified, what does not get magnified. And, we're not going to go into AI today, but we do need to have a conversation about the, what would I call it, wholesale theft that large language models do. And Quillan, my son, Doug, the Exploratorium is designed an AI exhibit that opens this summer. And I'm going to be in touch with you privately, see if I can overlap you in San Francisco. Because, don't overlook the giant amount of havoc that this is creating, as well as its hits to the environment. Now, when we do liberation theology, feminist liberation theology, women's voices have routinely been excluded from the public square, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And there was a meeting at the White House about women's health, and there were no women at that meeting. So I'm wanting through this Substack to give voice to much of what we have learned in feminist liberation theology. And I will quote a little bit of what you said, Quillan, in the next one, because the title that I have as a draft is Republicans Are Trying to Kill a Lot of Us, which I believe is absolute. They met at 1 o'clock in the morning this morning, so nobody could hear them debating this bill. What does that tell you? So that's and that's exactly 8 minutes, Mary.
Susan, thank you. And Puilan, thank you again. These are kickoff conversation starters and ways to get us into the day's topic. And I think both of you, and I am grateful to both of you, have indicated the difficulty and the gravity of the situation and the seriousness of it and the extent of it. And I think that's where working as we do in feminist liberation theology, looking at a global picture, is helpful. I want to turn now to comments from a couple of other colleagues of ours, in which we'll see in a short video. Monica Maher is a social ethicist with decades of professional experience in Latin America, currently in Quito for the last 15 years at least, teaching and working on human rights issues. And then Kath McPhillips, a sociologist of religion at the University of Newcastle in Australia, will offer a few remarks. She's a scholarly expert on religion and abuse, and particularly interested in the way in which the universities are being affected by all this. And Sheila Curran, who's with us today, is a Sister of Mercy in Ireland who has spent many years ministering in Peru, although she didn't get the papal nod this time. I don't know why he got it and you didn't, Sheila, but anyway. Her field is practical theology done from an ecofeminist perspective. She currently works with immigrants in Dublin. And finally, we'll hear from Renata Rose, also with us, a peace activist and ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, who studied economics and political science in Germany, her home country. She is a tireless voice now in her 92nd year for justice and peace. So with that, I thank Wed and Magdalena for putting this little video together, and I offer it to you for your edification. Go ahead, please, my dears. Thank you.
Greetings to all at Water and the FLTN. I'm Monica Maher, speaking to you from Quito, Ecuador, where I work on feminist, faith-based education and public advocacy for sexual rights and reproductive rights, a field that has been devastated by the US federal budget cuts. All of the funding for our work at the Ecuadorian Faith Network here was recently ended because of the domino effects of Trump's policies. And many other organizations in Latin America working on sexual and reproductive health and rights have also lost all of their funding. This comes at a time when many governments in this region have already slashed their own national social service budgets and increased military spending, which is the case of Ecuador. And of course, these cuts have the harshest impacts on women and girls in already underserved areas, namely indigenous territories and Afro-descendant territories. The current policies only increase the huge economic inequities. In this region, the activists and academics see this all as a reaction by transnational fundamentalisms, sociopolitical, religious, and economic, to our collective successes in moving forward the human rights agenda. But we will not go back. People here are resilient and will continue to fight. We need to work together across borders, forging tighter international connections in order to respond with savvy strategies to these reactionary transnational forces. This is a critical call for global solidarity, mutual global solidarity. We can learn so much from the amazing resiliency of social movements around the world, of women and girls who face huge challenges with incredible vitality and creativity. Together, we can be stronger, we can be smarter, and we can generate joy and energy for the long journey ahead.
Hi everyone, Kath McPhillips from Australia. Just responding to the two questions that Mary has asked us to look at. So the first question's about how we in Australia are experiencing the current US government actions. Well, obviously, we have had major concerns and have been subject, of course, to high-level tariffs and the economic and political instability. But we have watched in the US the censorship of academic voices, the closure of DEI programs, the arrest of that young Turkish woman supporting Palestinians, and the sacking of staff. So it's been very distressing. It was fantastic to see Harvard pushing back and other universities joining in, so I hope that continues. The impacts in Australia are many. So one of the things that happened was that research funding from the US government sector was interrupted, and any grants that involved DEI and social justice were automatically cancelled with no appeal process, of course. There are lots of accounts of people being stopped and interrogated at US borders as they are entering the US from Australia. People are talking about their visas being cancelled. They're sent home with no explanation of why. Some of these people actually live and work in the US and they have no idea why they can't go back. In Australia itself, universities in the last years have been under significant pressure financially, and many academics are being retrenched from a number of universities. Students have significant pressure with fees and debt, especially post-university. And the humanities and social sciences continued to be devalued with jobs lost in this sector. The impact of the introduction of AI on humanities is just sort of really uncertain at this time. The good news is that in a general election 10 days ago, you probably will have heard that the Labor government has been returned with a vastly increased majority, and the Conservative Party, which was mirroring Trump politics and social division, suffered very heavy losses. So there's a great outcome, and it's given us all a lot of hope. So we followed Canada, and we've followed through Canada in a really thorough rejection of Trump and MAGA policies. For our work together, I think it's really important to keep the international networks alive and active so that we can support each other in our work and resistance to fascism and idiocracy. And also, what support do you need from us in Australia? Because we want to support you and provide solidarity.
I'm coming from Ireland, so I suppose Ireland always had a close relationship with the US, because of our history and emigration of lots of Irish people there. But one of the challenging things that people are finding is that whole sense of a moral bankruptcy, in the United States, and the contribution to really dismantlement of the world order that was established after World War II, because it acts kind of manifestly above and against the law. It's as if there is no other, international platform to which it wants to be accountable to, and that's really scary at the minute, given the war situations around the world. And I suppose the second point is around greed, just the sheer sense of greed for money. And Donald Trump's actions around who he has both in Parliament with him, the kind of people that he surrounds himself with, but also his sense with the arm trade in Saudi Arabia and the gift of a jet or whatever, it's, lured by the wealth. And also his idea of plundering natural resources in other countries, like what kind of a deal he wants to make with Ukraine is not for around peacemaking, but is around trying to gain, the natural resources. And that false narrative, that he promotes about making America great again, which is really about greed, wealth, and a really, really bad, serious divide. And I suppose the increasing thing of racism, polarizations of, groups of peoples, and the widening gap of, rich and poor. And then on a faith level or a church level, how that has fed into right-wing ideologies, especially with Vance, and I suppose, how Vance uses his so-called Catholicism as, feeding into the right, well, they're not so much clear right narratives, like right or left-wing narratives, but I don't know another word for that. I suppose in terms of the Feminist Liberational Network, it's really about strengthening our network and really, I suppose, meeting more just to share our information, and how do we, coming up with strategies about how do we lobby to really put truth to power out there in a way that helps other people understand a more nuanced and deeper analysis of what's really happening, both within the US per se, but its role on an international level. And as people of coming from a values-based perspective or faith perspective, how we kind of link that, especially when there is kind of right-wing narratives or faith that are so destructive.
I am Renate Rose from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I'm starting with a quote from the Quixote Center, a group of progressive Catholic priests who work mainly for the local communities in Haiti. Heartless disregard for human life and dignity defines the current administration. We are shipping people to the 21st century version of concentration camps and gulags, the prison in El Salvador, without due process or any hope of ever getting out. No other country I know is able that such a thing is happening in the United States, which claims to be a democracy and in fact is not. The Philippines, to my great joy, where I lived for a while, has held its former President Duterte accountable for the murder of thousands of poor people, the so-called drug smugglers. Our president, himself a criminal, is able to continue his unconscionable actions. So what can we do, as you asked? One person or one organization will not have much impact. Therefore, there has to be a global movement, which means all feminist movements need to work together and need to work with those movements who work for non-violence in every regard. That is to say, all the peace movements, the healthcare alliances, like the healthcare nurses, for example, the Red Cross, especially the Center for Nonviolent Communications and the Center for Nonviolent Solutions, the Network for War Resisters, ICAN, the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, IPPNW, the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, etc. It is clear that war is built on patriarchy and hierarchy. All so-called Christian churches must show that Christianity needs to be changed into a radical pacifist religion. Thank you.
Thank you to each and every one. Now is the time for us to talk with each other and to get clear and concrete about what we want to do next. We have heard from 6 people, and I thank each one for their insights and perspectives. It's time now to continue the conversation. We will spend the next 12 to 15 minutes talking with each other. It's just a start, I know, but it's something. We want to talk about how you and your colleagues are experiencing this current U.S. government action and reactions from other countries, including mass firings, budget cuts, and especially the campus issues, and then how we can shape and strengthen our FLTN work to resist, build, and support communities. I personally am very interested in the surveillance state, and I hope that there'll be some conversation about that in the small group I'm in. So we will now move to small groups, and at the end of that time, which will be 12 to 15 minutes, we'll come back together and have an open plenary. So enjoy your groups, meet new people, get some ideas, and share strategies. Again, with thanks. Welcome back, everybody. Reluctantly, the groups have stopped meeting. Most reluctantly, I can tell. Let us, we have limited time, and I want to be as efficient as possible about this. So I want to make 2 suggestions. One is, and I know some people have to be at other meetings. We normally don't go over the hour, but we did today because of the urgency of the topic. Let me suggest, 1, put your best ideas into the chat. Put your best ideas into the chat as quickly as possible so that we can capture those while they're fresh in your mind, while you're ready to work. We want to capture those right now. So let's just take a minute or so to write in the chat. And then I'm going to open the floor to hear from a couple of people who might have had an experience in their group that they think we just can't not hear. They won't sleep tonight if we don't hear it, and we will be much diminished if we don't get that indication that that's where we need to be going. So we will get, first of all, the chat, and I'm going to stop. Put your best idea in the chat. Looks like people are pretty well finished. We will, as always, publish notes from this meeting, which will give you the compilation of the chat and also any concrete suggestions that emerge. One thing that I heard was some people don't know about Substacks. And so we will be sure to have the links to the Substacks by Susan and Kwak Puilan in the notes, and urge you to look at those immediately and to find some others that might be up to your standards and of your liking. Let me open the floor and let's hear from a couple of people and be as concrete as you can about not just the global situation, but what it is that people like ourselves, we gathered, can and should be doing, both organizationally and individually, but mostly as organizations and groups and communities. What should we be doing in this moment? And again, I repeat, we will be meeting again in November in Boston in person. But many of you will not be there, so we'll try to figure out a way to have this Zoom continue for that as well. So floor is open. If you'd like to speak, at the bottom of your screen is a little heart that says react, and your reaction is to raise your hand, and then we will call on you. See, my hand is up, and we will call on you for your comment. Try to tell us what you think we should be doing next. Go ahead. Who's going to be first? Still busy putting those in the chat, I think. Yeah, Betty Lane.
This is just, I would like to bring it forward to this group. In our group, Rita Nakashima Brock asked if anybody is writing a comprehensive history of feminist theology and womanist theology, because she thinks that that would be a really valuable resource, and I totally agree about that. So if anybody is, I guess, be in touch with Mary and she can get us that information. Thank you.
Yes, Rita and I had a long lunch a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about the need for this project, and I completely concur. So many of the issues we've been talking about for so long, and some of our colleagues who have predeceased us have already dealt with so many of the issues that are now very current. I mean, when you think of even intersectionality and interstructured oppressions, I mean, we've been talking about that since the beginning of time, haven't we? And now many people are beginning to see that as a normative political construct. Yes, who's next? Thanks, Betty. Yeah, Judy.
That's Lynn. That says.
Oh, it's Lynn. It's Lynn.
Yeah.
Okay, I was saying.
Yeah, Judy.
Glasses on, Mary. Yes, it's Lynn.
Yeah.
Lynn McConnell, California. Go ahead, Lynn.
Just wondering if it would be a help to people. I don't know how to translate it, but I just received an article from Ivone Gebara regarding Palestine and Gaza. I don't know if people would want to read that. She's certainly a wonderful liberation theologian from Brazil, but I don't have a translation for it. Probably Google can translate.
Yeah, easy. That's an easy thing to do. And
her
family background is Lebanon, if I'm not mistaken. So she has
yes, she has
a lot of interest in this and a lot of expertise. She's actually written an historical novel about her mother's Lebanese family, which is very interesting, including has little drawings that she did. I mean, talk about the creativity of some of our great theologians. It's
absolutely,
it's fabulous. Yeah.
Anyway,
Judy,
I'll send it on to you.
Lynn, get that,
right.
Get it onto us. We'll take a peek at it, see what we can do, at least a summary.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Roz Hutton, go ahead, New Orleans.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we don't need to reinvent the wheel too. There are groups on all of the issues we're interested in immigration, in ACLU, in reproductive rights, who are traveling women and doing case management to safe spaces. And that maybe we need to have the old-fashioned rent parties and just try to gather some people locally to talk about some of the issues that really burn for us. And then raise a little money. It doesn't have to be a lot, and send it to the groups. Maybe we can gather some groups that share our values, and in these different areas, who are really activists on the ground, and help them out.
Yeah, I take your major point to be that we don't need to reinvent the wheel, and that there are lots of groups working. I think the question for today, or maybe for the question for some of us for later, is there, or what are some of the particular things that people with our backgrounds, and I'm thinking of what Puilan and
I mean, the
talked about.
theology.
Yeah,
background,
with
yeah.
especially on the religion questions and the interplay between those dynamics that we have long called out in terms of patriarchal religion. And as, for example, as the Catholic Church now has a new pope and the same old, we've had absolutely no impact there. What are some of the things that could be what are some of the things we should be shouting from the rafters that come from our experiences, as well as, of course, doing what you're suggesting? So. Yeah. Who's next here? Let's see. Sheila Curran?
I think in terms of theologies and religion, we need to really keep pushing back on that fundamentalist ideologies that are running around wild, and how that has fueled the underlying narratives of the patriarchal, misogynistic ways in which the global order is manifesting itself stronger in other parts, than other. But if we're not speaking out of a theological discourse in our particular faith places and spaces unitedly, well, then it's easy to dismantle that. I just think of the like of Vance and how he uses it, or Trump uses Christianity in a format that's really destructive. And from friends that I have in the US who come from either a strong Catholic background, how they feel that this government is going to save them, from this fundamentalist ideology of a Catholicism that's nothing related to Catholicism, firstly, but secondly, how it fuels that other narrative that's being put out. And I think that is really dangerous. So a younger generation sometimes doesn't have the same information or the access or realization that some of these topics have been around, Mary, for a long time, like you say. But depending on where you go and who you're with, you may not realize that. And the other side is who builds solidarity with whom.
Yeah, thank you.
Keep that going I think is really critical today, at least from where I stand.
Thanks, Sheila. Yeah, I'm looking at some of the comments in the chat too, and I think there's certainly interest not only in what Roz is talking about in terms of people doing people-to-people kinds of things, which is crucial, but also Catherine Pothig has raised some of the question of how do we use critical skills to evaluate what we're hearing. And I think that's one of the areas too where we undersell our own product here if we don't realize that we have some hermeneutical and exegetical, as it were, understandings of how we look at texts, how we take in information, how we vet it for its usefulness, and understand the perspective from which it comes. I mean, those are all skills that if you're a physicist, you're not going to bring to the table. And if you're a lawyer, you're not going to bring to the table. But if you're somebody who comes from where many of us come from, you are going to bring it to the table. So I think that's really important. There's another suggestion about a reading list of fiction that promotes feminist liberation, theology, and solidarity. You could start with Susan Thistlethwaite's Marvelous Mystery Stories, but there are other pieces as well. And also the importance of social media. We are learning that here at Water, especially with our two interns, that social media really is an enormously powerful tool, which of course, like AI and all others, can be used in many different ways, but no reason then not to use it, rather to use it to the advantage of people who are most marginalized. So there's lots of good creative stuff coming in. Who else has got something before we call it quits here for today? I'm taking Sheila's comment that we probably need to meet more often. Yeah, go ahead. Who's next? Lynn again?
Would it do any good if we all wrote to the Pope? You know, and sort of,
The
yeah,
Pope.
would it be read? I mean, there are conversions like Monsignor Romero in El Salvador, who certainly was not socially conscious when he became an archbishop and did become very socially conscious. Is there any thought that that might help, or is that a waste? Well, it can't be a
Well,
waste.
it might be for another group actually, because this group is interreligious, non-religious, well past any kind of Catholicism, well past any interest in, I think writing to the, I don't know, people want to talk to the Pope.
I don't know, but they were talking about the need. Some person in our group said there is a need for religious groups to speak out. So
Yeah, I absolutely, and I mean, I'd be
Okay, gotcha.
happy to lead a delegation to speak to the Pope. I don't know that he'd like anything I have to say, but
No, probably wouldn't, but I mean, if he
that would
hears
be
often
great.
enough, yeah, who knows?
I'll put that on the list, Lynn, because I think
Yeah, right.
that could keep me busy for a while.
I'm just searching for anything that I.
Yeah. Great. Well, it would be kind of fun. I'll buy the first gelato. How's that? How about other people? Some things that we should be thinking about doing in a immediate way.
I think we should start looking at the performance of patriarchy, not only what they're saying, what they're doing, what the images are. And those images, for instance, on the recent, whatever it was, ordination of the Pope or whatever, was absolutely stunning. The theatrics, and every world leader turned up to watch the performance of male hegemony. I wrote an article, something to the Irish Times, which of course was never published, critiquing male separatism, since the Pope had critiqued the rise of female clericalism. So I wrote in return about male clericalism, which goes unrecognized, unremarked, and unchallenged. So performance as well as discourse, I think, needs to be critiqued radically at this point.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right, and I think and in that way, going back to what Lynn said, I mean, you know, this Pope is getting a lot of press because people think he's going to be good on these issues, but since he's not good on some other issues, it's hard to imagine. He's supposed to be good on Palestine. He's supposed to be good on Gaza. He's supposed to be good on ecology and so forth. But I think letting patriarchal religion drive the train here would be something of a mistake. On the other hand, I think Mary Conran is right as well, that the way in which the press handled the major religious event of this year so far has been disgraceful. To, in an unnuanced way, say, oh, well, now the first 3,000 people entering this in this church are all men, and never even, just unnuanced, don't even mention that you know. So you know, I begin to feel after 50 years of this work that maybe we haven't accomplished anything at all. In terms of that religion has maybe maybe our efforts are not best placed on the religious front, because that certainly was wiped out in the last 15 days, that between the death of the Pope and a new one, it's as if nothing we have ever done on any of that has made any difference. So I don't know. Betty, you want to try again?
Well, I guess I want to bring it back to the local and say that I feel that with all this patriarchy, whatever we can do in our own local congregations to either affect the liturgy in terms of bringing in more female images, or in faith formation and study groups to really, you know, hold up the feminist and womanist ideals and teach them to people. Those of us not Roman Catholics have a little more flexibility in liturgy. But I think that's an important thing, is to really let, you know, that's how we work a little bit at a local level against some of the patriarchy.
Absolutely. It's you know, in some ways these questions are so broad. It's everything. What do we need? Everything. You know, that's why we're thinking of changing water's name to wine. Women in need of everything. That's been a suggestion that we change our name to Women in Need of Everything. I'm thinking today that might be the best way to go. Arlene, you have a question, then I'm going to close it out, or comment.
Bless your heart for taking my question. Just real quick, thinking of Harvey Milk in my social location here, one of the most important things I think he said was we got to give him hope. You know, how do we, so the question is, how do we keep hope alive? My recommendation is we don't try to reinvent ourselves. I'm 61. I just retired on Sunday. You know, do what we can where we are as long as we have life and breath to do it. Inspire the young and leave them a legacy worth emulating or learning from or building on.
Thank you very much. And the wisdom of Harvey Milk is welcome. I also love the fact that Harvey Milk once said that if he had turned around everyone every time someone called him a faggot, he would have walked backwards most of his life. And I think that also is a very helpful way of thinking about not responding and reacting to everything, but in fact to keeping our face forward, moving along, and looking to the sides, who's accompanying us. And that's why I think sessions like this are so important, because it's who's at your right, who's at your left, who's above you, who's below you on Zoom, that we take away from this, in addition to the very insightful comments from our speakers. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and especially for taking a little bit of extra time. As I said, we'll meet again for this Feminist Liberation Theologians Network in November on the 21st in Boston. Hopefully we will be able to set it up in such a way that many of you who are not going to be there for the other meetings will be able to join us. FLTN is a project of Water, and all Water projects are free, open to everyone. Our work is to socialize the remarkable resources of feminist liberation, theology, ethics, and ritual as broadly as possible, and we do this in as many ways as possible: liturgy, meditation, book talks, conversations. Maybe we need a Substack. I don't know. I might be competing here with my friends. That is to say, collaborating with my friends Kwak Puilan and Susan Brooks Thistlethwaite, whose work is so important. I want to reiterate it. I want to give special thanks to them and to Monica, Kathleen, Sheila, and Renata for sharing today. We graciously at Water, of course, accept your donations, and those who can donate do so in such a generous way that we have never had to charge for a program fee in the last 25 years that I can remember. Our belief is that if we share together, there's enough. If we share together, there's enough. And because of this generous sharing of time and talent and money, it has been that way for 40 years, that there has been enough. And I have no reason to think that's going to change. So again, thanks to all. I must say, I feel a little more courageous as we disperse today, knowing that you too are persisting and resisting. I invite you to be safe, to be well, to be active, and I wish you a good day from Water. We'll send you the notes, we will send you the suggestions, and we will send you any constellations of those that we feel emerging from people who want to, through this network, work together. So stay tuned.